Such a good photo, Kate. One with the balls.
It wasn't that long. I actually had it edited. Although you can see in that one I was starting to lose it a while ago. Sorry, more. I shouldn't really point to stuff here, should I? Because anyone watching at home.
Okay.
Why is the horse with the ball?
Oh,
It's just a ball thing.
Well, thanks for the invite, Angus. Nice to catch up. It's been a while since I've been to a VSAC meeting. I think I've been to many over many years, even going back to when I worked at fisheries in Queensland. But yeah, just start off by paying my respects to lands of the Kulin Nation that we're on, and I guess part of the continued connection and caring for country is something that the organisation I work for respects and tries to sort of uphold. And a big part of what we do is around, basically learning from people who've been here a hell of a lot longer than we have, but then also putting that into practice in a way that sort of mixes with where we are now. So my name's Kade Mills. I like ball pits. I also do a bit of diving as well. I guess I've been a scientist for about 20 years. So that's a marine scientist. So
have you ever done a study on the ball pits and what sort of?
Oh no, they're gross. Oh, they're absolutely gross.
They're really gross.
The horse is there because if you Google my name, there's a dude in the States who's a horseman. He's also called Kade Mills. There's another one. So that's what comes up. So I'm just letting you know, yeah, there's two of us as far as I know. A doppelganger?
Doppelganger.
Yeah, we don't look Canada. It's fortunate for one of us. Work that out. But I also like to spend a lot of time in the water surfing, which is probably why I ended up being a marine scientist. It's because I was a terrible surfer. Loved it, was never going to make a career out of that, and I thought, well, maybe I can do something in science. And Radio Marinara there, for those who don't know, on 3RRR, which is a community radio station, 102.7 on Sunday, 9 to 10, I'm one of a few hosts that host the show that gets various people on. And we should probably get someone on from VSAC to talk about the 7-year celebration. It's quite a big milestone that you've been around for that long, and there's a lot of history there. And we can only cram in 10 minutes of conversation, but we can let a lot of people know about the organisation and what it's been up to for that time. So I'll organise that. So as I mentioned, I work for this mob, Victorian National Parks Association. We've now been around for over 75 years. So it's interesting, like sort of similar time frame, been around for a long time. We kicked off because Victoria didn't have any national parks. So it was basically a few mates got together and said, oh, this stuff they're doing here, there and everywhere, protecting areas, maybe we should get on board. So we'll set up as a campaigning sort of organisation to get them into Victoria. Heavily involved in terrestrial parks, also marine parks, but then a big part of the role is also ensuring that they're managed properly, and part of that is, you need money to manage parks, and that is looking at ways of using natural space better, and it's all science-based conservation. So we use emotion because emotion helps, but it's all based on science. So a lot of the work that we do is often putting words to, often scientists, particularly in university settings, don't have as much freedom as they would like to think they're meant to have. So we have a really good relationship with a lot of scientists doing work in terrestrial and marine space. We can often provide a voice for them in that space. So I've got so much shit to talk about. So if anything's boring and anyone starts to fall asleep, I'll move on quickly. If you have questions, just throw them out all the time. Like, I'd rather have an open discussion than me just chatting the whole time.
Where in Victoria was those?
That was at Port Campbell. So I don't know if you've been down there over winter, because it tends to senesce or it tends to die off over summer. That was probably 2 years ago now. Port Campbell around the pier, or where there was quite a decent macrocystis bed there, but also over the other side. And I haven't even got anything in here about macrocystis, but there's a lot of work going on in this space, particularly in Tasmania, around everyone because of the East Australian current. We've also lost a shitload in Victoria, but it hasn't been documented as well. And there's probably a lot of that historical information sitting within, because you guys have dived all over the freaking place, and you would have notes, you'd have logbooks of spelling ground. This is where macrocystis was. I know the heads had a lot more of it. I know in around Western Port as well. There's quite a few spots where we've actually lost macrocystis, like the beds that extend to the surface. You will still find the odd plant sort of dotted around here and there. So work's being done to try and restore some of these systems in Tasmania, but it's also looking at coming over to Victoria is probably one of the next steps.
Do we know why they've been lost?
Climate change is sort of the easy answer with it. Not 100% sure. Part of it, I think the drought that we had, because macrocystis likes, well, one, cold water, but it also likes a lot of nutrients. So there's still some solid beds of macrocystis around the Bonnie upwelling, which is down towards Robe and that border area, because you have a huge amount of nutrients into the system. Places like Port Campbell, so we had that drought, was that over the 2000s? We had that drought, and that's when like urchins in Port Phillip Bay started to take over, and apparently it also coincides with losing a lot of the macrocystis beds because they weren't getting that nutrient input from the land. So yeah, you need that water coming through, all that brown shitty water that we all hate, but it's also full of nutrients and it's full of food for stuff. The one at Port Campbell, that had a really wet winter, I think, for a couple of years leading into it. It's potentially correlation, but we don't know for sure. A lot of it's just theorising around.
That's right near the edge on the left-hand side as you're looking out.
Yeah, so if you're standing on the beach on the right and the left-hand side, there were some really solid sort of beds. Yeah, so much fun to snorkel on. But I'll start with these weedy sea dragons. We're just talking about, there's a shitload of them. They're everywhere. But we also have some inside Port Phillip Bay, which we know at Portsea, and then Flinders, and they're sort of the most popular sites that people get the opportunity to dive with them. They're also in the Royal Melbourne Children's Hospital. I've been there a few times. I've got a 6-year-old kid. I don't think he found it exciting because I think he'd fallen and whacked his head on a coffee table. I stopped to take photos of the weedy sea dragons that were there at the time. This was a school in South Australia, like a childcare centre, so they'd use all the bottle tops to put it together. This was at the Melbourne Zoo. Unfortunately, they had a plaque that went with it that started talking about the leafy sea dragon. As you'll know, that's not a leafy sea dragon, so even people at the zoo can get their species wrong. This is a literal weed sea dragon on the beach and created. And also, you know, Snugglepot and Cuddlepie, there's a book that has the dragons in stables, which I probably don't advise that as a husbandry technique. They've been on stamps as well. And I do like the description, which you can read for yourself, but like an odd looking fish.
Okay, we talked about First Nations people and connection to sea country. Do we have information from First Nations people about sea dragons?
I stumbled across something once and I forgot to, and it was in Sydney. So there was, whether it was a carving or a drawing or something sort of indicated that looked like a weedy sea dragon. And it was dated, like it was the First Nation sort of bit of artwork. Cannot find it again for the life of me, so completely lost it. Spoken to the Bunurong and Wotherong sort of here around sea country and stuff, and a lot of that information, like Victoria, we completely fucked over the Indigenous populations and they've lost a lot of the history and a lot of that connection and story. So they're working really hard to get that back now. And part of it is like having conversations around these things and sort of them then going off with the information and seeing if there's stories that sort of bring some of that information together. But there's nothing that I'm aware of in Victoria, and there's one small bit, and it would likely have been something that's washed up.
Yeah.
Because of the depth that they're at, you know, they weren't, you know, spending much time in the water, and they do wash up a lot. So that's probably where it came from, and that's kind of weird. This is a stamp that's out at the moment. So, that comes with the token in 2024. It's all the state emblems, which, as you may or may not know, we have a marine emblem, and it's the weedy sea dragon. This is, you know, for those who love a family tree. What's that?
South Australia for it.
No, they've got leafies.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they were happy with theirs.
yeah, they were. Yeah. I mean, it's like, I'll be honest with you, love a weedy, but the leafies are pretty. Kind of cool, yeah. Yeah. So this, you know, some people love the phylogenetic tree to see where things fit in. You can see the seahorses up there and the stigmatids as well. And the big difference being where they hold their eggs. Anyone who's seen a weedy Notice that they all hang on the tail, and then a lot of the pipe fish have sort of 2 locations, and it splits some of them. When it comes to weedies, I'm just ripping through this because I have a huge amount, and if there's anything of interest, please just stop me, or if I'm not making any sense, and just blather. So there's 3 sort of species, sort of grouping. So weedy that we know of, the leafy that, you know, if you've been to South Australia, you've probably seen. And then the ruby, the story around the ruby was quite cool. And this love science when people just go, you know what, that just doesn't look right. And it's what happened in a museum. Someone was going through all the specimens that were collected in the museum, and they're looking at the weedies, and then the rubies were basically in with the weedy sea dragons. And they just looked at it and going, just doesn't look the same. So went on, did some genetic work, and found a completely different species. And then since then, they got some funding, which of all places, Americans love sea dragons. Like you would not believe. I've got an alert set up on Google for any time like we sea dragons come up. They celebrate the birth of them in the aquariums across the country. You could do a road trip from one side of the coast to the other and back, just visiting aquariums where weedy sea dragons are in the States. So anyway, the research funding came from America to go and try and find rubies in the wild, basically, so to work out where they were. So we look at the next slide. There's 2 red dots. So I think that's around Bremer Bay, and then that's another one that I think was the collection in the museum as to where the ruby sea dragons have been found. Generally found in deeper water, so around 50 meters. So the footage they have is like just putting down remote drones underwater, and we're able to get footage of it. So we got 3 species that we're aware of. Part of a project that's going on, well, I was going to say around Australia, but basically around the range of the sea dragons is this project Sea Dragon Search. So the idea behind it is that when we look at weedies and leafies, and so the IUCN is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, they have these lists that they put out, and this is what kind of gives governments and agencies a kick in the ass to do something about things. So if it gets to the extinct stage, we've completely screwed up and it's gone too far. But as we progress along, vulnerable, yeah, people don't stress too much. Endangered, yeah, they get a little critically endangered. That's when funds start to get thrown at stuff. The idea behind this is that when this assessment was done, we've looked back at it and sort of gone, it could have been done better, and actually think it should be sitting a bit higher up. But the other is to try and be proactive in the sense of like, let's try and keep it around this least concerned or near threatened, like basically keep it in that category. It is the state emblem. There is a lot of interest in it, and it's kind of, to me, it's almost like the koala bear of the marine world in a sense. And I hate the idea that we have to do that. Everything should be respected and treated much the same, but it's not the case. If you're going to get support, you're going to have these sort of iconic species to work around. So we're working on this IUCN. We've actually just put in the most recent update for it to bring it up to be honest, off the top of my head, I can't remember. It's vulnerable and endangered. And what it is, it basically has started to lose it from habitat. So we've had climate change in New South Wales. The northern extent of the range has started to shrink. There's areas where they had been seen where they're not being seen anymore. There's areas in Tasmania, I think around the Derwent, where they were sort of inside the estuary there, where they're not being seen, which I think is more a pollution and change of habitat in those spaces. And they're starting to be lost from different locations. They identified some of the gaps. So for the scientists in the room, which I think there's a few, we haven't actually met yet, but your face is so familiar. Yeah, I think I've seen a lot of photos on. Yeah, good. That just sorts that for me. But so we've got the criteria that's there, and then the data gaps. So the idea is like, here's what they look at, and here's where the data gaps are. And so Sea Dragon Search is trying to fill some of these data gaps. And the way it's done is that in science we do this thing called mark recapture. It's done with animals on land. Sometimes they put a tag in them, or they do all sorts of stuff. The beauty of sea dragons is you can just use their head. So if you have a good photo of their head, you can actually, the spots are unique, kind of like a whale shark. And every time that one is seen, it can start to provide information on the size of the population. The way it's done, I actually started doing this project basically on my own, and it was like using a program where you would have to draw the dots on manually, and then it would run it through to see what was it matched up with. Now, with everything sort of moving to the AI space, basically it draws a box around, goes, this is the sea dragon, so it pulls it out, and then it pulls the head out, and then it starts doing the matching. And then it basically brings it up, and a scientist has to sit down and go, yeah, looking at all these things, looking at the models give me this is basically what it is. So the match to one that exists in there, and there's two populations in there. There's a left-hand side and a right-hand side because they're not the same on both sides. But it does give us information on them being there. One of the things that sort of come out of it initially, there's a guy in Tassie who dived all the time with weedy sea dragons way before this program. And I think the estimate of life for him was about 14, 15 years. Speedy's been around for at least 16. They think that photo in 2014, like, would have been a couple of years old at least. So it's at least about 18 years. So it sort of extended their life range. We don't know how that compares across states because a lot of anecdotal information. Is that? Anecdotal, yeah. Sorry. That stuff, what you said, around the differences between them physiologically in the different states. So they seem to be deeper bodied in Tasmania than compared to sort of New South Wales. Genetics has been done and they're all considered one population. I was actually involved in a paper where we suggested that they may be separate populations on the east and west of Victoria, with Wilson's Prom acting as like it was a land barrier, so acting as a barrier, but it's since been proved that no, it's not. So I wrote a paper and it's wrong. So that's pretty exciting. But it's actually, but that's science. So to the best of the knowledge and the best of the tools we had at the time, this appeared to be the right answer. It ended up being wrong, and it's like, well, cool. Someone's actually, yeah. But this, again, people, I've got this mixture of data and non-data and photos. So this is basically the marker capture. Oh, it's not marker capture. So down the bottom, we've got the number of individuals and new individual discovery. So every time we find a new one, so each dot is a sighting, and it starts to move along that line as we find a new one, if that makes sense. So we've got the number of individuals up the side, and going across is each of the sightings, and it goes up every time there's a new individual sighting. So we've got Flinders and we've got Portsea. The thing to sort of look at here, different scales. I didn't put together these graphs. They both drive me nuts because they're not the same scales. But if you look at Portsea and the 750 on the bottom axis, you got 750 encounters. And around that, you've got about 300 individuals. You can see that curve is just starting to flatten off a little bit. Whereas you look at the 750 at Flinders, you're up around the 450 sort of individuals, and it's still kind of growing up. Probably not going to surprise anyone. There's been work being done at the moment. This data is a little bit old around running a model to get an estimate of the population. There's a lot more at Flinders than Portsea. I mean, I'm sure you all could have told me that before we did that.
What about areas such as the Castle Rock? And last weekend, some of the guys that I was dived with just found some on the Coogee. I found some great big ones over at Inverloch. Are you interested in those sort of outliers?
Super interested in those, because they're ones we don't have information on. And there's all this information around them not moving. So you know, they've done work in New South Wales where they've moved 500 metres to a kilometre, sort of as far as they've been found. We had one that was photographed at Portsea and ended up at Sorrento. So we think it might have got caught in the current like that, and then sort of ended up there. There's the one, is there one sitting off the back of Rye at the moment? Yeah, I've heard of them off Blair Gowrie, but I haven't got photos. So what we need is just the photos of their heads. So date, time, photo of the head. Yeah, please do. Part of the open coastal population really interested in is the connectivity of them. So if you're seeing at Castle Rock, do they turn up anywhere else along that sort of continuum? Yeah, and the thing is, it'd be interesting also if you keep sending photos in and they're just new individuals every time. Like, so it will actually give a better estimate of the population. The fact that we're not finding new individuals constantly means there's a lot more of them than we sort of expect. So it's all good information to know. So there's,
sorry,
yeah.
What kind of time frame is that over?
It is mostly from 2016 to now. So what's that, 8 years worth? There'd be a few from before and sort of around. There's someone doing their PhD. This is sort of like the first run of PhD. I've got all my data. I'm just going to have a look and see what's there. There's someone actually working on all this information at the moment, and there should hopefully be a paper coming out soon, which will have population estimates for Portsea and Flinders. The beauty of that is we've never had it. So, and all the time, we've got this population here, it's great, everyone goes diving with it. Well, how many are there? I don't know. What's happening to Portsea? Oh, we're constantly losing all the sand, we're going to bag it, we're going to do this, maybe we should build a marina. So, well, no, if we can actually get an idea of the population, what's there, then you can start to put things in place to go, okay, that's what we want to protect. We want to make sure that we maintain that population of whatever size, and it's a great way of, one, protecting it for future generations, but then just divers themselves. So, as I said, there are heaps to get through. Sea slugs. Has anyone not got a poster in the room? You don't have a poster. So,
Oh,
I come with goodies. You've got a book?
I've got a book.
Okay. Come with some of these. I don't have enough for everyone tonight, but I'll be attending the 70th, so I'll make sure I bring some along.
Yeah, we put them up. We go up to store price or put them in store that they cost a bit of money. You'll contribute to getting some.
No, they don't cost anything. The idea is to get them in the hands of as many people as possible. So everyone knows Ian. Everyone knows Ian's fascination with slugs. Yeah. I've actually created this event for him.
That'd be right.
So this is the overview of basically what we're going to talk about. For those who aren't familiar with them, there's a little bit of background into how I go about finding them. There's also a lot of people that know they exist but can't find the damn things. I often fall into that category myself. Just follow in. Yes, would be my advice with that. So working on what, can anyone tell me which one's not a sea slug? See, there's some interaction here. It's not just me sitting here talking.
That guy called John Old.
I'm sure John would have some person up there.
Let's try B.
Well, thank you. So these are we've got like, the typical nudibranch is A, B is a flatworm, C is one of the sac blossoms or the sap suckers, D is a side-gilled slug. You'll see that pluribranchia hillo, you'll see that at leg arrow, that's the one like you can't miss it, they're kind of all over the place, and massive big egg ribbons in the sand. Then we got another couple, E and F, I've forgotten what group they fall into at the moment, it's just there, but B is the one. So here's, again, for people who like taxonomy and to like to put things into categories, here's how they all kind of sit together. If you don't want to memorize that, it is all in the book. And sea slugs is not a scientific name. It is not a scientific group. It's just a handy term that makes people go, yeah, if it looks like a slug, it crawls like a slug, we call it a slug.
It's a nice bucket.
And to put everything in, yeah. And
We come up with the other it's.
the other it's that would be Nicole. So there were two of us working. Oh gosh, I didn't even talk about the program we're on, which is Reef Watch, which is a marine citizen science component of the Victorian National Parks Association. There's me, like that's it. I work 4 days a week. That's running all these projects. There were two of us, which was great. She left and has now come back and taken on another role within the organisation. But she's the one who has the artistic skills to put that together and also did a huge amount of work on the book that's there. So anatomy, for those that like it, rhinophores, basically their nose. So, you know, our nose detects chemicals in the air, like that bite you did in this seat, I can still smell it. Sea slugs have rhinophores to detect chemicals in the water. So that's what they use to basically move around, find their food, find their prey, find their mates, find whatever they're looking for. So that's the little bits that go up front. Then we have the oral tentacles or lobes, and so that's what they use. Like you'll see some of these cool photos where it's all kind of out and sort of a bit sci-fi. That's what they use to sort of probe around to find their food and to get their food into their mouth for most of them. The sapsuckers are different in that they have a radula, so they have, it's kind of like a knife tooth. They're amazing. They're super cool in that they can open up the cell wall of plants, so whether it's chloropa, green algae, generally, they can open it up, extract the chloroplasts, keep the chloroplasts alive, basically digest them, move them through their body, put them on the outside, keep the chloroplasts functioning, and can live And this is where I kind of love and hate science, is they can live for 2 months without eating just off the energy created through the chloroplast that they've stolen from a plant. The way that you do that is you feed something and then you just see how long it takes it to die. And 2 months apparently is what it is. I wasn't responsible for it, I'm not a scientist, but that's how they work this out. And then you have bits that allow them to breathe. So the gills are sort of the ones that everyone.
David Bloom is talking. David Bloom.
Go, Dave.
Not talking.
No.
Obviously.
If they write up any comments, I'm happy to answer them as they come through. Just read it, just yell them out because I can't see it in front of me. Yeah. So yeah, the gills is what they use to basically extract oxygen out of the water, and some can do it through their skin as well. And then they have their genital aperture, which I've got a great photo of that next. But they're both basically hermaphrodites. So they have both organs and they get it on whenever they can with whoever they want. Within the same species. Yeah. So they have all the unique sort of things that help them survive. So that apsmatism, God, I can't do big words tonight, is that idea of like, I am so bright and flamboyant that there's no way you're going to mess with me because I'm poisonous and toxic. And the way, like, some actually are, others just like, well, it works for them, I'll give it a go. It's an adaptation. Then you've obviously got those that are super camouflage. You can see on that pink sponge there, the Baconia. It's really hard to see it. Really easy to find because you just find the pink sponge and just stare at it for long enough and eventually they'll sort of pop out. It's like a 3D image.
Photo and then when you get
It happens all the time, yeah. And then the pleurobrink, so the one that's sitting on the sand, can excrete a sort of acid, which is, it's like lemon juice basically, but you know, there's not many lemons in the sea, so it is it repels predators in that sense. Then we've got the solar powered ones, beautifully laid out like a leaf. Then the other two, so Glaucus is the blue one, which most people have sort of come across or seen photos of them. And I'm not sure what the other one is, but they steal the stinging cells of hydroids. So whether it's the blue bottles, they're similar to the chloroplast, can digest them, pass them through the body without setting them off, leave them on the outside. If anything touches them, it's bang, they shoot them off into them. So they basically steal their weapon.
after going through the body.
Yeah, going through the digestive system, yeah. So pretty cool. Nudie-sex. So we're talking about genital apertures before. There it is. We've taken the liberty of blocking their face off.
Andrew McKernan, take note.
So as I mentioned before, hermaphrodites, top to tail mating means that they can't get it on with themselves. They do have some unusual strategies. So conga lines, there's sea hares. I think it was in, is it Anderson Inlet? Is it?
Yeah.
Everlock? Yeah, the sea hares will sometimes get in huge numbers in Anderson Inlet, and they will be like one in front like that, just, and they're each taking on, I think, each taking on like a different role as they're going through. Yeah, to fertilize. Detachable penises. So there is a species that basically, when it mates, it just leaves the penis in there and off it goes. It has a second one in reserve, so it can go and mate with someone else, and it can then grow a third within 72 hours. Again, science, you can just have to think about how they discovered that. But the idea being, if you leave the penis in there with the sperm, it sort of prevents others from mating. That's sort of technique to help with the mating.
The questions I could ask right now.
Yeah. And then the other one is head stabbing. So not only do they have a penis, some of them have, it's called a penis stylet. And during or after mating, this stylet sort of comes out and they stab, and they reckon they put like a chemical into the brain, and it's around avoiding future reproduction of other stuff. Yeah. So yeah, and this is just what we know of a few. Most of this work seems to come out of Japan. Yeah, but we know very little about what we have here. So a lot of this stuff might be the same genus. So we're assuming, or we're sort of guessing, potentially this happens here, but we don't know for sure. So the sea slug census, as I said, it wasn't necessarily created for Ian, but it was, in that I sort of independently came up with the idea, saw that someone else was doing it and went, well, instead of reinventing the wheel, why don't I join forces, and got in touch with a guy who'd been doing it up at Nelson Bay, up at Port Stephens. So that was back in 2013, and it started because him and a mate were nerding out over the slugs they'd seen during that dive. There was a group there that, like, what are you doing? They showed them and they're like, oh, we love them too. How about we all get together and find more? And so they did. And it promotes the weird and wonderful. It's a really good way to engage with people, kids, like even just the stories that I've told you around their adaptations and things like that. I've even had high school kids that have I've managed to get a laugh out of them. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's a big feat. But all the senses are contributing to this understanding, particularly around their response to change. Climate change is one, but also that food sources as well. We're starting to get better information on the foods they're associated with. So if the food's not present, they're not going to be present as well. So we're starting to piece some of that together. So in 2018, we kicked off the sea slug census. For those that have heard of Bob Byrne, Ian's a big fan of Bob Byrne. So he's, I don't know how old anyone is, but he's older than me, probably twice as old as me. But he's the Victorian nudibranch expert, but he's also a builder's contractor. Everything he's done on sea slugs, he's basically done as a hobby. He was published in Nature, which is the most outstanding journal in the world, when he was 24, because he found a whole new genus of sea slug. He's got over 100 publications, honorary member of the museum. And again, all this stuff was just done as a hobby type of thing. When I started the census, I caught up with him and said, oh, we're going to start a census, get divers to take photos. Would you be happy to help us identify them? He's like, it'll be easy. Divers won't find anything interesting. All they'll do is take photos of the big, pretty ones. And I was like, oh, okay, no worries, Bob. Well, thanks. But are you happy to help? He's like, yeah, sure. So that little one up there was, I think, the second photo I showed him. He's like, I have never seen that before in my life. And from that moment, he was hooked. I'm actually catching up with him tomorrow. That's part of running the census, is I get the pleasure of going to hang out with this guy who just gets off on this. It's amazing. And he said we wouldn't find many. We think there's about 500 to 600 species in Victoria. And by we, I mean pretty much most people except for me. Ian's a big part of it. Have found over 300 species to date. And when we say 300 species, there's most likely more, because a lot of them we can only identify to a genus or a family level, because the information just isn't out there at the moment. We've had, so this was published in Malacology Society. So Heidi, who former VSA, she's still at VSA. Amazing photographer. Oh, Mari, yeah. Anyway, yes, Heidi found this in Port Phillip Bay, and then we had some other stuff. As a commercial diver, had found it in Gippsland Lake, so one that hadn't been recorded in Victoria. And we're starting to piece together all these species that are extending their range. And by that I mean previously found in warmer waters. Now that things are starting to warm and currents are starting to flick them around, we're actually starting to find them creeping into Victoria. This was from the guys. Oh, I'll go back to that. So the guys who did it in Port Stephens, one of the things they're like, all right, we've got scientists going out to find them. You've got people like Ian and that are out to find them. Can we get good information and good data from just using the public to help? And basically they wrote this paper to prove that, yes, they can. So almost as many species, and the species richness that was recorded, 97% similarity. So it means that when we're doing these censuses, the information coming from people is of a quality that would be similar. And to be honest with you, I'd hate to be a scientist trying to study this. I am a scientist, and I go out with people who know what they're doing, and I find sweet FA compared to them. Yeah. So it really is something that, like, time in the water is a big thing, and a lot of people like Ian have that time in the water and can find a lot. So if you want to find them, the easiest thing I always say is think like a slug. So think of slugs in your garden. If it's a sunny day, are they sitting out in the open? No, they're in those sort of wet, dark sort of cavities. Sea slugs are much the same. They don't really like, unless they're the solar powered ones, they don't really like being out and sort of desiccating in the sun. They're going to be hidden under rocks, slabs, cracks, crevices, in the shade of piles and things like that. And they're always on the move. So the hardest thing for a lot of divers is that they're always on the move, so they're not going to see anything. You need to almost just stop, drop, just look at a spot. Hopefully your eyes are better than mine, and just look for movement, and you'll start to see almost that it comes alive, a small space, and that's generally where they've been found. The other thing is the size of them. So here, I think or what once was called an Oceania, and there's someone's thumb, just to give you an idea of the scale for some of them. Yeah, so that's on a bit of a clonia. So they can be really difficult to find, which is why Bob said you'll never find them. That was a slightly removed. The other thing is you don't have to dive to do it. So if you've ever been to Phillip Island, as you cross the bridge at San Remo, that's where all these photos are taken. So for the last probably 18 months, I've been running a sea slug census with the public, getting people out there looking at what's under the bridge. And I think the most we've found is like 9 species in an hour. And I'm not really looking much. It's basically everyone else is looking. We've got kids that come along. We've got one girl who's just written an article for us. So we have a magazine called Parkwatch. She's 13. She's got a list of the ones that she's seen, the ones she wants to see. She's got all this artwork. She's got a jumper with paintings on it, like completely obsessed with sea slugs. But this is an accessible way to get people into it. And then you don't have to worry about your air either, and you're not lugging around heavy gear. Highly recommended as a snorkel for those that love to get in the water. Slack water on a low tide, San Remo Bridge, walk up towards Point, and then particularly around the bridge. Huge amount of diversity. I go with one guy in particular, and he will generally find anywhere from 15 to 20 species in a couple of hours sort of snorkeling. So there's a few around. So we have got data for those that like.
Is there less in summer, less in winter than?
I'll get there. I've got data. So for those that know what a species accumulation curve is, the idea is that every time you go out and you try and record the number of species, eventually you'll reach a point where it flattens off because you've been out enough times and you've found all the species and it just sort of slowly tails off. This is the species accumulation curve for all the sea slug censuses we've done. Anyone want to hazard a guess what the shape of the line's going to be? Any idea? Yeah, it's just, we just keep finding new species every time we're going out constantly. Yeah. Same with this is frequency of species sighted. So this is the idea of how often is a species found. So you've got like once or like thousands of time. And so generally you'll have this sort of reasonably, you've got lots and then you've got a few that have sort of found sort of, well, can be like that. Varies depending on how easy or hard things are to find. If you want to guess what it's like, you draw a picture in your mind. Is that what you expected? What this is basically saying is that one species, that one little dot around the 400, has been spotted 400 times. 87 species have only been found once. So in the 20 times, or I think there's 18 times worth of data here, 80, like the vast majority have only been found once.
And are they species that you suspect are endemic, or
We know next to nothing about them, so
proportions of fouling species, or what are the proportions of different categories like endemic, fouling species, and
to be honest, as far as like species that are endemic, we know of a few introduced species, but then there's also a lot of argument around, are they introduced? There's one species in particular that looks the same as one that's from the Mediterranean, so it's been called that name. And now I think some work's been done and it's like, well, no, it's not actually that one. It's potentially a whole new species itself. And then others are considered cosmopolitan in that they're found across quite a broad range and they don't know where they're actually endemic to. So we actually don't really know that information sort of on it. I think a lot of them are quite small, the ones that are only been cited once. But to be honest, I don't know the reasons why. So this is our most popular, probably doesn't surprise anyone. This is the one that has been found second most, so the made up Phylodesmium cat. I think that's okay. And then an orange blob is the other one. Yeah, so they're the top 3. I've actually got an article that's got like the top 10 and I'm working on stuff to try and create a guide for those that have never found them before and highlighting some of the species like this that have found more frequently. So this one is the number of species identified each survey. So what you notice, the red is basically when we went from 4 days to 10 days and we started putting findings up on iNaturalist. Prior to that, people were emailing images in, so we weren't sort of getting as many. But you see there's this sort of steady increase, and I think part of that is that people are actually starting to find more. People are going out more often. The census is getting people out, so we're starting to see more.
Hey,
Yeah.
yeah, how you, in your data here, are you showing those that don't get a species put to them in iNaturalist, or like when it's got a genus spurt, are they in this data set or are they excluded?
They're in this data set as well, to the best we can do. So some are like family groups.
Yep.
And there might be 2 or 3, might be even 4 species that fit into that family, but they don't have a species name. So they'd be gathered, but any of the spurt and the RB ones, they're all included in it.
Yep.
Yeah. And so the same with the number of observations we're starting to grow up. And for us, it's more a sign that people are engaging with it more. And the number of photographers, again, sort of
Yeah,
similar.
I was wondering about, even for the camera quality now.
Good point. Number of people, and what I call the number of photographers is the number of people who manage to find a sea slug and take a photo that can be used for identification, because that is some of my photos. So that is often what there's a lot of people that go out that don't find them. So this is only people that have actually submitted images, and we're well aware of that.
Do you classify the one on the right as a usable one?
Don't know what the hell this is. So this
It's a blob.
was probably won't be any surprise to people who know the initials of some of the people that find a lot. So of the 305 species that have been found, John, you're coming 3rd. Ian Sholey is coming 2nd, who's almost found 50% of the 300. And NO is actually Nick Shaw. So if anyone's on iNaturalist, you will have seen Nick's name and some of his amazing photos that he takes. And then yeah, so you're in there as well. So just under 20. I know Ality is sniffing on the heels of everyone there. And this was done a couple of censuses ago. So all it's basically saying is, so like mime in there, KM, I haven't even seen 30% of what's been found during the census. Freaking hard to find, but that's kind of what keeps people going back out. We're talking about the seasonality of them. So I've got the number of species that are found in each season, but I've also put the number of photographers over the other side just to give you an idea of, there's a bit of distortion in that. But you can see that summer, autumn, similar number of photographers, more being found in summer. And then you look at spring, we actually have less photographers out in general. But you're still finding a lot in that time. And I remember that was what Ian was saying even before I started. So he's like, go out in spring. He's like, but it's Port Phillip Bay in spring. Everything's coming to life, everything's getting it on, the temperatures are rising, it's queuing everything. It's like, all right, it's party season. So they're all around.
So just relating back to that, is there a case of you're getting more species in the warmer months because of more divers out taking photos, or is it?
No, it's just, there's a general cycle in Victoria, particularly in Port Phillip Bay, probably more so, it's just seasonality. It's that everything's sort of dormant, so things aren't growing, feeding out there sort of amongst it. And a lot of these things only live for 1 to 2 years, so they're not around very long. So they may be there and we're just not finding them during that season, or it may just be like life cycle wise, they're basically, they're floating around the water column, or they're sitting in an egg spiral, just sort of waiting to come out.
Eaten by soldier crabs.
Or, I'm still waiting for someone to show me a photo of spider crabs eating nudies, because everyone's like, oh, they destroyed it. I'm like, probably trampling more than the actual, the digesting of them. Like they're just like, you see the marks everywhere, and if slugs are in the way, like they're just skewering as they're going through. But I'm still open. I'm still looking forward to seeing that photo of the spider crab actually picking one on munching.
Is that your challenge?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is just a plug for the next one. The date's 18th to the 27th of October, and it's all done through iNaturalist. This next slide is just to say how cool the nudibranchs have actually made it onto Swatch watches. So they're heading mainstream. They're on the way. And this is just my favourite nudibranch because it looks like it's giving you the bird.
It's got very
Yeah. Some Madrella. Yeah. Okay. You'll see them at Williamstown quite a lot. So if you go around the rocks and crystals and stuff like that, and they're often on Olga, so they stand out. It's like, oh, cool. Yeah, one of my favourite. So plug for iNaturalist. For those of you who don't use it, you'll see there's Alities up there for this project. So this is Marine Life of Victoria. And the idea is just to create one spot where anyone who's taking photos of Marine Life of Victoria, throw all your images in here so we can all kind of see what's going on and learn from each other. The beauty is this, there are almost 40,000 observations now of 1,600 species, but we're heading towards that. And all of this just makes your life easier. If you're taking a photo of something like, I don't know what the hell this is, you throw it up there, someone identifies it for you, they learn, you learn. And I was pointing out, Elodie, this is Elodie, some of her dives that she's done in places that she's been. Sorry, I'm not stalking you. But it's a way for you to have a record of what you've seen and where you've been. And it's a visual record because you've got photos of all these amazing species and things that you've done.
And
So-
provides you a database for a potential AI model to sweep across at some stage.
It provides information for so much stuff, yeah. And it's open source. It's not hidden behind anything. It's there and it's available for everyone to use. So great for you, and then it's great for scientists in general. This project's awesome. Australian Fishers, Australasian Fishers, started by a guy at the museum in Sydney. Gangbusters. If you've taken a photo of a fish and put it on INAT, it's like straight away, can you join our project? Love it. And you can see heaps of observations, but the other thing you can do is use it yourself. So I went into it and I'm like, oh, I'd love to go to Lord Howe Island. So using that project, I drew a box around Lord Howe Island, and now I've got photos of every single fish that have been photographed on Lord Howe Island. So I know when I go there, oh, cool, this is some of the stuff that's here. I wouldn't mind seeing one of them. I wouldn't mind seeing one of them. How cool is that? Before you even get there, you can do it for land too. So, the insects, the bugs, the birds, whatever you're into, you can do it. I use it in my garden to find if I can eat my weeds. Like it's amazing for everything, but great for fish. So highly recommend. Sorry?
Have you ever got that wrong?
Yeah, no, stick there with mushrooms. Yeah, highly recommend it. People use. Now I'm getting into some of the campaigning side of things. I'm aware I'm running short on time, so I will go through some of this quick. So one of the things that we're campaigning for is basically a framework for Western Port. So Port Phillip Bay has a management plan. There's all these things in place. It's like we dredge here, we have national parks here, we have the heads here. We've got we have all these assets in Port Phillip Bay. They're all mapped and they're all kind of put into a plan. And it's like, all right, you want to dredge that spot? That's fine. We know you're going to dredge. That's where you're doing. You want to go fishing there? No, you can't. It's a marine reserve. If you want to dredge there? No, you can't. There's a marine reserve. So it's a way of helping people make decisions quite easily and to stop stupid proposals from getting any further than just being a stupid idea. There's nothing like that in Western Port. Western Port is basically, if you want to do something, you go, yep, we'll do it. And it's open to an environmental impact assessment, which is quite different. So we're pushing for some marine spatial planning using Western Port as a bit of a test case to go, well, look, if we can do it here, then it can be unrolled basically along the whole coast of Victoria. It's something the state government's promised that they would do, but they're just sitting on their hands about it. Here's some pretty photos of Western Port, so I can go through them quickly. That is the corals or the Bryozoan reef. That's at Western Port. That is on an amazing day visibility. Really weird, bizarre place to dive. I'm sure a few of you I know have been out there and checked it out. It's quite cool. There's seal, sea slug. So a lot of it came about. So this was when AGL were proposing the gas terminal at Western Port, right next to the Ramsar wetlands, and they were able to propose it. If there had been a spatial management plan going, has a Ramsar wetland here, we have these birds that fly from around the world to come here. Not a good idea. It would have saved everyone a whole lot of heartache, and the government spent a lot of money. These are some of the politicians from Mornington that are on board. You'll notice the Liberal seat is empty. They didn't want to be in the photo. I'm just going to skip that so you're not reading it because I don't have much time. But I've sort of mentioned it's about creating a plan for the management and use of Western Port. And I will get to why that's important in the next one. This is another project I do. If you type in underwater weeding, this is what you end up with, because no one does underwater weedings, but there's plenty of underwater weddings. So this is around Undaria. For those of you that aren't familiar, Wakami, it's an introduced seaweed in Port Phillip Bay. It's all over the place, been in since the 90s. But it's from Japan, been in for a long time, but it's actually a major food source around the world. So that's like 23 million tons of it were made to go into food. And we have it as a pest in Port Phillip Bay that we can basically eat. So project come up and it's getting local dive communities and dive groups around going out harvesting it. Some are taking it home and eating it. Others are using it on the garden. The thing that stopped people in the past is it involves getting permits. So I'm going to step in and say, look, I'll do that part for you so that you can get out there. Guides to help people around identifying, making sure the right thing's being taken. As I mentioned, they're my tomatoes after using Undaria. I'm sure there's a whole lot of other things, but that's like they dry it out in the oven. It's used for stocks, broths, soups. And there's also businesses around the bay that are using it to create seasoning and spices and stuff like that. But it's a free resource. All you need is a permit to be able to remove it. And I spoke to the lady in fisheries who's in charge of the permit, and she said that's her favourite thing is to give permits for this, because she's like, it's a win-win situation. Like, you're never going to get rid of it, but if people are going to eat it, it's a resource. That's
Is it based
growing
on person or is it based on location? Or you?
Location and person. So I've got a broad that's got a huge amount of locations and quite a lot of people in it, which I like. I don't mind adding people to mine. So cool, if you've got a spot you want to go and get, I'll just add you to mine. And that means that all these people can now go to that spot, but it also opens up other spots for you to go and collect it. With that, pretty straightforward. And as I mentioned, there's a good on the garden. There's a lady trying to create what she's calling CT out of it, just out of the stuff that people CT for the garden. And it's also been tried to make beer out of it. This is Ocean Divers. If anyone knows Jane and Liz from Ocean Divers, they thought they'd take another spin and see whether it would. It is also used for health and beauty products. So I won't. You can guess which one's Jane and which one's Liz. No, they swapped. So talking about the planning before, so offshore wind is something that's coming up. Renewable energy, it's coming up a lot, and as an organisation, part of it is this marine spatial planning. So it's this idea of having areas, okay, this area is rich in biodiversity. Don't even think about putting an offshore wind farm here. This area, yep, not as many values. Let's see what's there and then propose to put it in there. The government, apparently it was described as they basically just get a map and go, where do you want to put them? There? All right, cool, let's do something there. And that's how a lot of decisions are being made. So the idea is to try, and it's not anti anything, it's just let's start making smart decisions, use all the information we have out there, get some good policies in place so that we can make clever decisions around this. So these are some of the areas. I put the line through Portland because some of that western section hasn't been approved, but these are some of the areas that they're looking at for wind farms and where some have been approved. That's just an idea of what's kind of involved. And you've obviously got the land side of it. You've got not just the turbines, you've got like the substations and that there. So you've got a bit of structure and water way there. And this is, I guess, sort of the plan. The idea is it's a collaboration. It's not trying to shut down anything. It's like, well, let's just plan this as best we can. This one, I think, quite interesting. So we actually have a document. If you go to the Victorian National Parks Association webpage, it's called Winds of Change, and it basically all this is kind of outlined in it. So there are some positives to it. When it comes to putting structure in the water, everyone who owns a boat knows if you leave it there for long enough, shit's going to grow on it. Like you're going to end up with stuff there. So that's what there will be a lot of stuff on and around. It's like any of the oil rigs that are out in Bass Strait at the moment have a huge amount of life sort of living on it as well. But there are some other issues too. So this is, again, just going through some of the things that we actually know and how they should be overlaid onto this plan from where they're putting the areas. So I think none of it, to me, seems like groundbreaking to most of you. Like, well, duh, of course that's what you do, but it's not what is often getting done. So I'm not going to make you read that. If you're interested, we've got the document. So I'm going to rip through this. This is actually an interactive game around the fish count. So these are all the people that support. I should have VSAG there because you guys do a hell of a lot of fish counts every year and I love it. So these are the 25 fish that we have on the fish count slate. I'm going to play a little game that's not going to involve these ones because we don't actually know how long these fish live for. This is a game, when do these fish die naturally? Or when do they end up in a lab and someone works out how old they are? So basically how long the fish live for. The eight species I've got there, we don't know. So again, there's all these knowledge gaps in the marine environment that you're like, surely we know how long these fish live for. So, no, we don't. So I'm taking them out, I've reshuffled it. And there's the tombstone is going to go across them. All right, have a look at the fish. I think we lose one here in 10 years. So it's just in your mind, or if you want to yell out, that's fine. Let me know which one you think doesn't live for over 10 years. Sorry, Senator Rass.
Oh.
So let's go 20 years. We're going to lose a few more. So
I'm surprised the squeak's still there.
Is that right? Yeah, so is anyone, there's one that lives for quite a long time. Does anyone want to hazard a guess? Okay, any other guesses? Like keep throwing stuff out. What's that?
Goldfish.
Yeah, all right. We'll keep going. So what are we up to? 30 years. So we're losing a few by the time we get to 30 years. I've reshuffled again just to clear it up. 40 years, that is the eastern blue groper, less than 40 years. So if we get to 50 years, there's a harlequin fish that hasn't been seen in Victoria since like the 1800s. I think there's a record in the museum of one from Port Phillip Bay, which God knows how. Yes, we're still in there. 6 years. We lose one sweep. We lose the silver sweep. The interesting thing, and I've printed this out. I will get to it. So we've got 70 years. We lose the second sweep. Now, one of the things I wanted to point out with this sweep, which is actually quite cool. So sea sweep, 68 years is the oldest one that's been recorded. And how they do it is they basically take, there's an ear bone in a fish and it has growth lines on it. They take that, section it, and they can actually count how long they are, how old they are. The interesting thing about them is age of maturity. So the age at which they start to add fish into the population. How old do you think a sweep's going to be? If they live
90.
Yeah, no. So sea sweep, 14 to 16 years before they actually start to add anything. So from a fisheries perspective, you've got to wait 14 years. It's almost like a team, like it's almost like us in that sense. And you can start to reproduce at 14. Yeah, if you have any impact on that, before that stage, you're starting to really decimate the population. Fortunately, they're not fished too heavily, but they are popular with Spiros. Yeah, and the silver sweep, so similar looking species, only 2 to 5 years. So if you're going to go fishing for them, get the silver sweep as much as possible. So continuing on, we're down to 2. Anyone?
Sure, the Western is going to be the oldest.
Okay, so we've got 80 years.
Oh.
We lose. Did anyone survive to 90 years? Yes, it does. Does it make it to 100 years? No. Banded Morwong, the oldest one, there's been recorded as 96 years old.
Oh.
But its age of maturity is about 2.5 years.
Oh.
It gets there quick. Yeah. Or it says 2.5, it might be 25.
Okay, what was the boarfish?
The boarfish is second, 55 years. So age of maturity is like 2 to 3 years. So a lot of them are sort of mature reasonably early. So this is just some information from the fish count. I'm not going to go through it because we're getting on, but it's how we use the information. One of the things with the categorical, so the 1 to 5, the 6 to 20, the 20 plus, is actually quite interesting because it can tell you a bit about the behaviour of the fish. So like blue throat wrasse, you rarely see on any dive 1 to 5. There's always quite a few. Like they have a herring, you've got a lot of the smaller ones and the bigger ones. Whereas when you get down to things like boarfish, cowfish, you really only see like a few of them in there. But one of the things we do is use our data and compare it to Reef Life Survey data. So Reef Life Survey do 50-metre transects, full-on scientific information. Fish count is just people going out and collecting information on fish wherever they go. It's a bit more haphazard. It's citizen science. The data's a lot messier. And all we're using here is a bit of a proportion. This one, it's really hard to tell as a tale at the moment, but we're just starting to sort of look at this information and get a bit more out of it. Similar sort of ranges. One of these, I guess, we're looking for is more for them to go off on either data set. And we're not really seeing that. And this is only a short period of time. In fish, we've just learned how long they live for. So 4 or 5 years is actually quite a short period of time in fish. And a lot of them are reliant on maybe 1 or 2 really good years of recruitment, and that will keep them going for a long time. And then there's that long-snouted boarfish. This is the world exclusive for the t-shirt for coming up for this year, for 2024. We're doing the herring kale. It spends all its life hanging around golden kelp. Golden kelp has sort of become the poster child for the Great Southern Reef, so we're trying to tie it into that. So we can do it. But one of the very last thing, is this is the Atlas of Living Australia. This is information that is used by scientists, used all over the place. You'll see you've got Reef Life Surveys data set and how many records are in there. You've got the Victorian Biodiversity Atlas, Home Naturalist. And then coming in 5th is Reef Watch, which is the fish count. So
of what we know about the distribution, the abundances and things like that, people getting out there and doing the fish count have been providing this huge amount of information for over 20 years that's actually sitting there and is available for people to use all the time. So it's a bit of a thank you, but it's also acknowledging that the work we say in particular do with the fish count is valuable and is constantly used. I think the data's been cited like in the hundreds of times and been accessed like thousands of times for various research purposes. That's it. I think I made it to 19. Sorry, it took a bit longer. That's right. Yeah. I'll leave. You can fight over the cage fight in the middle, over the books and the posters. Saves me from paying.
Closest to my laptop, so it must be mine. No, look, seriously, Kate, thank you. There's no lobster count, which is good.
No.
Angus doesn't know what they look like anyway.
There's some great research coming out of the marine parks. They've been looking at a lot of their data and the craze in the marine parks. Bigger, more of them. Like none of it's surprising, of course. They're not subject
Tell
to
us
pressure.
about it.
But then they're also spilling over. The ideas they spill over into the areas outside. So they're really working well for things like that. Yeah.
I think the Bunneron Marine Park. I mean, just I took the bloke first time I've been diving after he'd done his dive course. I think we saw 20 crows.
Yeah.
Some of the monsters.
Yeah.
You know?
It's a good sign that works for things like that. Yeah.
Maybe need some samplers.
Yeah.
Anyway, no, Kate, look, thank you very much. Thanks for coming in. Also, too, you know, I always say it's great to be in a club that contributes back to the local community and to research projects and have, you know, such a club that don't, you know, we don't get paid to do it. You know, it's not what we do. It's how we do it, and yeah, being part of those sort of community projects is going to go far. So no, thank you, and thanks for coming in all the way from.
Philip, I had to have a surf on the way, so yeah, you're blame.
Matt, did you want to do the photocom?
It will be very, very short.
Be very, very short. You want to skip it and roll it into next?
I'm thinking about it. Yeah, maybe I combine it.
Yeah,
But then
Winter
no,
depression.
you've already said that no one from this month are going to win in amongst all the others.
no, if it's roll a bit low, it'll be very short. I'll do one or two. We'll just put it in next month. We go a little bit
Winter
earlier.
depression.
Right, let me share my desktop. Yeah. Shit. This one. So, Kate, things up and coming. Well, obviously we know the website. The 70th is coming up. It's the major events, club meetings, 70th calendar trip. I think we have. So I got a note from Ian. Just if you bear with me a second.
Another calendar trip. Wow.
No, it's well, there's that's for this year.
Yeah.
And there's one a year later as well.
Oh, really?
So that's my note from Ian. There was now all spots are now taken on the calendar, so we had some last minute changes on that, so that's now full again. Next year is Palau and Vanuatu. These are open for bookings, so if you're keen, I'd like to do at least Vanuatu.
I don't know how you get leave pass.
Just pay for a deal, man.
I always do linger at.
So there's a $500. I'm just looking at the notes. $500 deposit if you want to do Palau, and Vanuatu is $1,500. So from that side of things, Christmas party Saturday, December the 7th. It's booked back at Beaumaris Motor Yacht Squadron. So at least try and keep that weekend free. Not for all into rescue diver refresher. Brian, you want to say anything to it?
Yeah, well, it's there, booked, it's full.
It's booked and full.
Just got to figure out and get it organised.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So the events covered. Activities planned. We've done that. We've spoken a little bit of travel. 70th we've done. Now, I've got, also wanted to talk about here. So new memberships this month. Ed's just done his induction dive, so we'll probably be announcing him next month. So that's great. Well, when we finish, yeah,
It's a 8 man, it's full member.
he's full member. Okay, so he's now full member. So cool. That's my bad on that front. Now on a little bit of a sadder note, and I want to bring it up here. We lost a club member last month, Arthur, and I just want to remind people about his funeral arrangements that came out. Ian Charlie sent out an email. There's a few of us that won't be able to make it. Myself, I'll be in the Gold Coast for work, so you know it's there. I think Arthur would appreciate us attending, and I know there's quite a few people going to come from the club. So from that side of things, I know it's difficult for those that are currently overseas, and yeah, Arthur was a great club member and always up for a good joke and a laugh. So yeah, on top of that too, that respectfully, the people that were involved in the club, one of the things that they generously did was we asked Stuart Cousins to have an interview with them, at which they agreed to have a bit of a debrief and to get some learnings out of the whole
Sorry,
event.
Stuart Cousins or John?
Stuart Cousins. Stuart. So John's spoken separately too. So that's all part of it. But so Stuart went and did a professional like Coast Guard type debrief with them. So at that time, Stuart will be presenting, probably more at the earlier session than necessarily at a club night, but it was a 6:30 session run by Sandrine. And I think that will give us some insights into the horrible set of circumstances that played out post. Some of the positives out of it, the comments that Ian particularly gave back to me was that the ambulance and fireys said that they rarely see clubs like us that had O2 deep fib on the boat. So that's one thing we've always put a lot of O2 on each of the boats. I think we've got like eight cylinders worth of it around on our boats. And it was always a really difficult time in the sense of what do we do with buying defibs? And they've sat in people's boats. And we've often wondered, what do we do? And it's like an insurance policy that when it came down to it, they had it. And it was just great. And what they downloaded the data from the event. The ambulance has taken it away. They've recharged the unit, so the unit's been given back to us in a fully working order, and they've got a whole stack of additional information. So look, Arthur was a great man. Yeah, he had a few medical issues, so and I think that'll come out more over forthcoming conversations. So look after your health, and if you can make it this Friday to his funeral service, I know Lyndon would be very delighted to have members come along.
Angus, I think that will also be an online link to people who can't.
I haven't seen that come through yet. So
Just
the other thing that I'm telling you unofficially, because we need to work on it a little, is we're going to try and put some little memorial on Canberra on behalf of Arthur, and I'm certain we're not the only club to lose a diver there, so we'll put a little amendment in there, whether that's across and a